Hello everyone, my name is Wanying Kang. I'm a postdoc fellow working at the Department of Earth, Atmospheric and Planetary Sciences at MIT.
And I'm Jeff Seewald, a geochemist in the Department of Marine Chemistry and Geochemistry at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Wanying and I have been asked to talk about ocean world workings with a focus on what we know about Earth's oceans and how that translates to other planetary systems. Face value, that's a pretty broad topic. So what we're going to do is give a few selected examples of what we've learned about oceans on Earth using oceanographic approaches that can be applied beyond Earth. I'd like to start by mentioning that there are several examples of ocean worlds beyond Earth in our solar system. Shown here to scale are 6 moons of Saturn, Jupiter, and Neptune, where evidence suggests that liquid water may be present, either at the surface or beneath a frozen ice shell. Although these moons are significantly smaller than Earth, it is believed that they are all characterized by a rocky core that is overlain by a liquid water ocean. If we look at a cross-section of an ice-covered ocean, such as Enceladus or Europa, for example, it's easy to imagine that many of the processes occurring in Earth's oceans are also occurring in these very different environments. One of the fundamental questions that motivates the study of these ocean worlds is assessing their biological potential. And what this means is trying to determine the amount of chemical energy that might be available to support chemosynthetic life and sources of carbon. There's also the question that if life is present, are biosignatures preserved? And if they are preserved, are they transported to the surface where they might be easily detected by a future mission? For my half of the presentation, I'm going to focus on fluid-rock interaction during circulation of fluid through Earth's lithosphere. Because this workshop is focused on carbon, I'm going to present some examples that highlight factors regulating the flux of carbon species between the lithosphere and the water column. Wanying will shift gears a little bit and focus on biosignatures and nutrients and how they are transported by ocean currents. Given the uncertainties associated with ocean composition and heat budget, her talk will sweep across a very wide range of parameter space and discuss various possibilities. One of the things we've learned by studying subseafloor environments on Earth is that when you combine rocks, water, and fluid flow, you create geologic environments characterized by abundant chemical energy. This occurs because the interaction of rocks and water promotes chemical exchange, especially at elevated temperatures. If you combine this chemical exchange with fluid flow, you can create strong chemical gradients that are characterized by disequilibria due to mixing of fluids of varying composition or changes in the temperature and pressure conditions. And it's important to remember that chemosynthetic life requires chemical disequilibria. Without this disequilibria, there would be no chemosynthetic life on Earth or anywhere else. Examples of such environments on Earth include mid-ocean ridge hydrothermal systems where seawater is convectively heated at depth in the lithosphere by either magma or hot rocks and circulates convectively before venting at the seafloor. And these zones of venting create enormous chemical disequilibria that are inhabited by vent ecosystems. Other environments include subduction zones where fluids are expelled from the subducted slab and may pass through portions of the mantle before venting in the forearc. Other examples include pressure-driven circulation in ridge flanks where variations in topography and the associated pressure differentials may drive fluids through the oceanic crust at depth. All of these environments involve the reaction of fluids with lithospheric rocks and significant modifications to fluid chemistry. If we focus our attention on hot spring fluids venting at oceanic spreading centers, we can see that these fluids are highly reducing, being characterized by millimolar concentrations of dissolved hydrogen. These hydrogen concentrations are accompanied by similar concentrations of dissolved methane and other short-chain organic compounds, all of which are abiotic in origin. The origin of these organic compounds or reduced carbon compounds and hydrogen is of extreme interest due to the potential role that they may have played in prebiotic chemistry that ultimately led to the origin of life. These compounds also represent a source of carbon and energy in ecosystems at and below the seafloor in hydrothermal systems on Earth today. If you look at the data shown here, you can see an apparent trend in the concentration of both methane and hydrogen as a function of rock type, and this reflects differences in the alteration processes that lead to the formation of hydrogen and ultimately methane. Ultramafic systems have received a lot of attention because they contain the highest concentrations of both methane and hydrogen, and this is due to the process of serpentinization. Serpentinization occurs when ultramafic rocks, that is, rocks that are very rich in the mineral olivine, are exposed to water at temperatures of about 350 degrees and below. And during this process, the serpentine minerals are formed along with brucite and magnetite. And you'll notice here that hydrogen is included in this reaction. And the formation of hydrogen occurs when ferrous iron present in olivine is oxidized to ferric iron that is present as a component in the mineral magnetite. And so we have the net oxidation of iron and the reduction of water to produce hydrogen by this process. Now, the process of serpentinization results in hydrogen formation, which creates very reducing chemical environments that may lead to the abiotic reduction of CO2 to form methane and other hydrocarbons. And these processes are typically referred to as Fischer-Tropsch type synthesis, although I will emphasize there are many other mechanisms that may be active in these systems. Due to the role of methane as a source of energy and carbon in hydrothermal systems, there's been a lot of interest in constraining the location and timing of its formation during hydrothermal circulation of seawater through the crust. Early models invoked its formation during active circulation of fluids at the same time as hydrogen was being generated during reaction with rocks. Recent work, both experimental and field observations, have revealed that the formation of methane is actually kinetically inhibited on the time scales of hydrothermal circulation through mid-ocean ridge systems, which typically occur on an order of a couple of years. And what we've found instead is that methane is being stored in tiny little inclusions, fluid inclusions in the rock. And during hydrothermal circulation, these fluid inclusions are being altered and the contents released to the fluid. And what this does is it allows little microreactors to exist in the crust for thousands and possibly millions of years, where kinetic barriers associated with methane formation are overcome due to the greater time scales. The fact that methane does not appear to be forming in real time during hydrothermal circulation of vent fluids does not mean that this is the case for all organic compounds. Shown here are the concentrations of dissolved formate and magnesium at the ultramafic influenced Van Dam vent field on the Mid-Cayman Rise. Plots such as these, where an individual species is plotted against dissolved magnesium, are a very convenient way to look at the effects of mixing during hydrothermal venting. And the reason for this is that end-member fluids typically contain close to zero concentrations of dissolved magnesium, whereas seawater is greatly enriched with concentrations of about 53 millimole per kilogram. What you can see here is that the end-member fluids with temperatures of about 226 degrees contain a little bit less than 100 micromole per kilogram formate. And upon mixing and cooling, the mixed fluids are greatly enriched in dissolved formate with concentrations approaching 700 micromole per kilogram. This trend has been observed at the Lost City vent field, which is also hosted in ultramafic rocks, with similar enrichments in dissolved formate. And the reason for these enrichments at both Van Dam and Lost City is because dissolved hydrogen concentrations, in this case for Van Dam at 18 millimole L, are very high, which results in the abiotic reduction of CO2 to formate. And this reaction has been shown through laboratory experiments to be very rapid, occurring in timescales of hours to days at temperatures below 200 degrees Celsius. The presence of formate in these fluids is very important for the microbial ecosystems living in these environments. It represents another source of carbon and energy, potentially for the methanogenesis. And work coming out of Julie Huber's lab has shown that methanogens are actively using formate as a substrate for methane formation. I'd like to finish up by emphasizing the importance of kinetic barriers to abiotic methane formation for microbial ecosystems on early Earth and possibly in ocean worlds beyond Earth. If you look at the metabolic pathways used by microbes in modern-day serpentinite environments, all but methanogenesis require either oxygen or sulfate that are present in an oxidized ocean due to the pervasive effects of photosynthesis on Earth. However, all of the ingredients necessary for methanogenesis would have been present on an early Earth, which is consistent with methanogenesis being one of the most primitive metabolic pathways for Earth-based microbes. It is only because abiotic equilibration of methane and hydrogen does not occur on the timescale of hydrothermal circulation that this energy is available for chemosynthesis. Before I hand off the presentation to Wanying, I wanted to provide you with a few closing comments. I won't read each of these, but wanted to draw your attention to the last bullet. Because ocean worlds in the outer solar system are characterized by a range of compositional and physical space that is likely much broader than that encountered at Earth's surface, and observations are limited, understanding the full range of possibilities that may regulate ocean world workings will require close collaboration between modelers and experimentalists.
Thank you for a great presentation, Jeff. It is fascinating to see how life may thrive in different environments. I will take over from here to talk about the ocean dynamics. And in this talk, I will use Enceladus as an example. This icy satellite came to our site since the Cassini mission a few years ago. Near its south pole, several gases have been found to eject a cocktail of organic and inorganic matters into the space. Since then, Enceladus becomes one of the most exciting places to search for extraterrestrial life because we can learn so much more about the interior by carefully examining the ejecta. However, before sending another mission, we need to understand whether we will be able to detect biosignatures from the South Pole gases if there was life living on the seafloor and the water-ice interface, and also what we expect to see. These are all related to the dynamics and how quickly tracers can be transported around. Ocean dynamics on Enceladus is driven by heat and salinity fluxes from the ice shell and the seafloor. These boundary conditions unfortunately have large uncertainties. We know that heat has to be produced somewhere to balance the conductive heat loss through the ice shell, but we don't exactly know how the heat production is partitioned between the ice shell and the silicate core in the ocean. If the heat mostly produced from below, we would expect convection to dominate, as shown in this bottom panel. But if the opposite is true, convection may not be able to form because the heat flux is too weak. Instead, ocean may be prevailed by a large-scale overturning circulation driven by the salinity and temperature gradient at the water-ice interface. On top of that, salinity adds another level of complexity because water may either expand or contract upon warming near the freezing point, and that depends on the ocean mean salinity. When the salinity is lower than the threshold 22 PSU, the anomalous expansion upon cooling will completely suppress the convection. And that is because the warm water is no longer more buoyant than the cold water. So a few questions that interest us are what ocean dynamics look like near the gas origins and how quickly tracers can be transported from the seafloor to the water-ice interface. We approach this question using an ocean circulation model. In our model, gases are represented by relatively thin ice shell located at the center of the domain, and ice-covered regions are masked by a white color in the bottom panels. We prescribe the conductive heat loss through the ice shell, and we prescribe the tidal heating production in the ice and silicate core in a way that the overall heat budget is closed. Then we let the system freely evolve. Water can transport heat around and ice can respond accordingly by freezing and melting. Given the uncertainties associated with ocean salinity and heat partitioning, we consider 5 different scenarios here. The first 4 are combinations of fresh versus salty ocean, core heating versus shell heating. The last scenario is similar to the salty core heating scenario, except that the bottom heat source is a narrow but strong vent located right underneath the geyser. In the lower panels, we show the dynamics and thermodynamics of the 5 scenarios: temperatures in shading, salinity by contour, and velocities by quivers. As you can see, the ocean is much more energetic in the last 2 scenarios. This is nothing surprising because the bottom heating is much stronger and the thermal expansion coefficient is positive in these 2 scenarios. Because of the strong dynamics, we expect the transport time to be much shorter. Right now you may ask, which scenarios is the most relevant one? Well, one thing can be used to discriminate the different scenarios is whether the ice geyser can be kept open. With ice flowing from thick regions to thin regions, we know that in order to keep the geyser open, these geyser regions need to melt over time. Shown in the upper panels are the freezing rate. Only the shell heating scenarios seem to be able to prevent the geyser from closing up. It's worth noting that even if the seafloor vent is perfectly aligned with the geyser, the convective plume will break up due to instability far before the heat is transmitted to the ice. Another question that interests us is how the global scale overturning circulation behaves at the various heat partitionings and ocean salinities. As I have mentioned before, the salinity and temperature gradient induced by an ice thickness variation could be a key driver of the overturning cells. So it's important for us to employ the observed ice geometry in our model. Shown in background schematics, ocean is painted in blue and ice is painted in white. Because the equatorial ice shell is significantly thicker than the polar ice shell, both temperature and salinity will develop gradient meridionally. The water underneath the equatorial ice shell is going to be colder than that underneath the polar ice shell because freezing point decreases with pressure. Moreover, in order to sustain such a power thinning ice geometry against ice flow that tends to transport ice from thick ice regions to the thin ice regions, ice needs to form in low latitude and melt in high latitude. These 2 factors altogether makes the equatorial water colder and saltier than the polar water. Now, if the ocean salinity is high, both salinity and temperature gradients gonna make the equatorial water denser and induce us sinking motions from there. To the contrary, if the ocean salinity is low, with anomalous expansion upon cooling, temperature gradient is gonna induce sinking motion over the polar regions. And this temperature-driven circulation pattern will override the salinity-driven circulation when the ocean is very fresh. This is exactly what we see in our numerical models. Shown here is the meridional stream function as stream functions as a function of latitude and depth for 3 different salinities. You can clearly see that circulations are opposite in the 2 end-member scenarios, and it's weak in the intermediate scenario. We need to know that no matter which direction the ocean circulates, heat is transported equatorward, as warm polar water being mixed towards the equator. In very fresh and very salty ocean, this heat transport turns out to be way too strong to be consistent with other terms in the heat budget. Whereas an intermediate salinity around 10 to 30 PSU combined with the shell heating dominated heating seem to be most consistent with the ice shell geometry that we see. We can apply this methodology to other azimuths such as Europa. Since that Europa Ocean is likely to be salty in order to explain the magnetic inductions, we don't expect such cancellation can happen there. And as a result, the ice shell may be very flat. I just used Enceladus to demonstrate how ocean composition can affect the dynamics and how the dynamics can interfere with the ice freezing and melting and tracer transport. In fact, chemistry and dynamics, ice and ocean, they are all closely coupled. I listed here some examples in the diagram, and certainly the interactions would be much richer than this. So to develop a correct understanding about these systems, we need to consider not only what's going on inside each category, but also how they feedback onto one another. That would require a synergetic and iterative collaboration, as Jeff has mentioned. We don't necessarily need to visit these azimuths to make progress. Instead, a lot can be learned from our Earth. Observing deep ocean and other unexplored environments on Earth can help us understand those ocean worlds. The Earth-based dynamical and chemical models can also be revised and be used to make useful predictions too. With this, we're gonna end our talk, and thank you for your attention.